Hello and welcome to Module 3, and this is part 1 of Module 3. So I hope you enjoyed the 1 and 2, and I just want to remind you this is a beginner's introduction course. Even though there's 4 modules to it, is all the beginning level. So I just wanted you to be made aware of that, okay? So again, any questions that you have regarding anything that we discuss in this session, please drop it into the chat feeds. And anything that you say in here, obviously, I understand that you want to discuss and learn like what you've learned, but the material itself, please try not to share that with people outside of this group. So these are the topics that we're going to discuss today. So we're going to look at how to look after your crystals, how to choose your crystals, sacred space, intention setting, how do you learn all the meanings of crystals, grounding and protection. So the big question I always get asked is, how do you learn all the meanings of crystals? So there are over 4,500 varieties of crystals. So the simple answer is you don't. When we think about it, crystals have been used by ancients for millennia and attach metaphysical properties to them, such as protection. For example, the Scots used Druid Iona marble and smoky quartz for protection, and the Egyptians used azurite and makeup in jewelry for other different metaphysical reasons. But when we think about the meanings of crystals, it was in the 1960s through to the 80s that work on meanings for crystals really grew. And there's a couple of people that we know as the Big Six within the metaphysical community who really created these initial meanings that we kind of know today, and that is Katerina Raphael and Philip Permute. Now, they wrote down the metaphysical meanings, and it was based on a practice of meditation. And what they did is they channeled with crystals and observed how the crystals made them feel. And they literally just sat around with, say, like a rose quartz. They thought about it, how it showed up in the body, what it, how did it release or ground. And these initial books, most books that you see today with crystals, are based on these works. So the thing which I think crystal books are really good as a really good starter, but the problem is, one, a lot of the newer books are all copied and pasted from the original Big Six. In addition to this, so Katerina Raphael and Philip Permute, they would have been using crystals from all over the world. So, for instance, especially in the 1960s, a lot of the crystals were from America. They were from South America being exported up to North America, or possibly from India going to America. And let's say you've got a rose quartz that comes from India or South America. So Katerina Raphael was using rose quartz from these two different continents, if you like. So, which is good in a way, but I still don't think it's sufficient enough to base all crystal, the metaphysical reason, let's say, for rose quartz is love and compassion and things like that. Now, although those frequencies are within that rose quartz, it really doesn't really take into account the other variety of places of rose quartz where it's grown, if you like. So for me, I've got a Scottish a Scottish rose quartz. Now, when I started working with this rose quartz, it wasn't matching any of the metaphysical meanings in any of the books. Its energy was very different. It was super grounding, and it was not for the heart space at all, which I thought was kind of quite interesting. And what I've kind of learned is that Generally, if we think about a journey of a crystal and how it's created and it comes from the core of the planet and then it solidifies in liquid form and then it starts to grow into crystals. And as it moves to the top surface, along the way, it picks up inclusions, different frequencies of the earth, and especially when it gets closer to the top of the surface of the planet, it starts to pick up different frequencies of where it's grown. So the land is very different. So I believe the where a crystal comes from and how a crystal grows starts to collect its own unique energy signature, its own vibration signature, and essentially it gets its own personality. So for me, I believe that if you really want to get to know your crystals, metaphysical meanings, you need to really connect with them, make friends with them, and discover their individual mojo. So, when we think about it, the earth is alive and conscious, and crystals were here long before humans, and we cannot really impose our meanings onto them. We really do have to go through that process of what the big six did to really listen to your crystal and be grateful for utilizing their vibration and bringing us into energetic equilibrium. But crystal books are really good to make a start, but what I would really, really encourage you to do is, again, do what the big six did. You have got your own crystal collection. Think about where each crystal came from. How did it get to you? And sit and have a journal and sit with each crystal for like 1 week. And you're going to be holding that crystal and you're really going to let it tell you what it's good for. And what I mean by that is you'll be feeling how it feels in the body, how it makes you feel emotionally. Any whispers or any inspiration that comes through that crystal, you start writing it down each day, and generally you'll get a personality that comes forth through your journal about what the crystal's personality is. And now, once you know that, you will have created your own crystal metaphysical book. So when you get a client or you want to work with a crystal and you think, "Do you know what, I really need something that will really help me emotionally release," you'll go back through your own journal and say, right, that crystal was really good at doing that. Because once you've done it once with that one crystal, you've got the information there, if you like. So I would really encourage you to create your own metaphysical book. The big six, they just literally picked up their crystals and did the same thing. So I would highly recommend you doing that. If you need help doing this in any way, please reach out and let me know and we can talk more about it. Okay, so how do you choose your crystals? So a little bit, thinking about what we spoke about just previously about really listening to its mojo and personality. The main thing about choosing your crystals is very much about intuition. So sometimes, like when I first started doing crystal work, I was like, "Oh, I need this, this, and this," and then I would be going around picking up crystals that I thought I needed, or especially, I think, "Oh, I have to have one of them in my collection," and most of the time when I did it like that, I never picked them up again because I didn't have this instant connection with that crystal. So the ones that I really, the ones where I saw a crystal in a bunch of the same types of crystal, and it was just like, that is the one, pick me, please. They are the ones that work really well with me. So so the first real great way to choose your crystals is through sight, along with this intuition, this relationship between the fact that you will be looking, scanning the crystals, and it's literally the one that pops. That is the one that you need right now. That's the one that you should buy every time when you buy a crystal, because you'll have a longer working relationship with that crystal. Whereas, as I say, I've got crystals before and I've just not used them because I didn't have that initial, power, if you like. Another way, if you don't, you can. It always boils down to intuition anyway. But if you don't want to use sight and you want to use more your physical body, it's a case of using scanning. Now, scanning in what you'll be doing is, rubbing your hands like this. Rubbing your hands. Let me make sure I'm on the camera. Rubbing your hands like this, and then really thinking and asking, which crystal should I use today, or which crystal do I need to buy today, when you're scanning over the crystals. And what you'll notice is, what you're trying to feel is a change, or something pops underneath your hand, or you get a shooting pain that runs up through your hand. That is a good indication that that's the crystal that you should be using or working with. Another more technical way is to use the pendulum. Now, the pendulum is normally crystal based, and it's very similar to like what I just said mentioned a minute ago. The thing is, with a crystal pendulum, you've got to choose a pendulum that you can work with and it wants to work with you. I've picked many a pendulum before, and they just haven't worked until I've got one, and it was just I really resonated and connected with it. So when you get your pendulum and you know it wants to work through, you've really got to learn its yes and no and its movements before you start using them to choose your crystals. So it's about getting your crystal and saying, love, light, love, light, love, light, to really connect with that. And you have to ask it a specific question. So, for instance, do I need this crystal today? You find out it's yes or a no, and then you move on till it gets to the crystal where it really reacts, and then you know that is the crystal that you use. So it takes a little bit more practice, because the practice really comes from knowing how your pendulum reacts. But it's a really good, fun, visual way to see when the pendulum says this is the one for you. It is very obvious. So definitely give that a go, but it takes a little bit of practice. Um, but you know, the thing is as well about choosing crystals, I always really go back to that first initial instinct, the one that just that lights you up and that goes, that's the one, I need that one. Because you will end up, as I say, working a lot more closely to it. Whereas the ones, I have got some crystals and I really want to work with them, because I know people have really good sessions with them, and they just don't want to work with me, and I'm just like, "Ugh." So I just have to accept that, because they have their own little personalities, don't they? Okay. How to look after your crystals. So the thing is with crystals, crystals are quite robust. They've been moving through the land for millennium, for a very, very long time. But when they've come out of the ground and then we start to use them in energy work, there's things that you kind of, it's a good practice to do, especially if you use them in between sessions, or on, on other people, or if you've been doing particular type of work with the crystal. And the first thing that I always go to is sound. So sound has got sacred geometry that weaves through the frequencies and the waves that really resonate with crystals, because crystals itself, as we mentioned earlier in the other presentations, is that they've got this stable atomic structure. Now, if we've been using a crystal every day for quite deep work, it will need what we call tuning, retuning, and sound is the quickest way to clear off any heavy energy, to really kind of set its equilibrium quite quickly. So, as I say, I always really lean into sound. You have other ways of using ways to look after your crystals or working with them, especially with water. So water is, it is the life force of us as well as the planet. And water holds memory, and there's a guy I think I mentioned previously called Dr. Emoto, and we know that we can imprint intention in water. So when we think about crystals and water, it is a really great way to clean off any heavy energy from your crystals, and also just to bathe them back into the energies of Mother Earth and the life force, which is, we know, is water. I would be very cautious about some crystals. So some crystals cannot go into water. So you also have to be very mindful of that, which is, when we think about those crystals, it is selenite, definitely can't go into that. Azurite, definitely not. And there's lots of others, so definitely check that out as well. But there's another way you can use to kind of refresh your crystals, and that is by using the moon. So the moon, if you wanted, so say if you had your crystals, and again you've been using them quite a lot, and you need to kind of cut ties a little bit with the energy you've been working on them for. So say for instance, if you're using a crystal for past life work, and you really don't want to bring those energies, you've done that work with that crystal, and you want to cut ties with it, put your crystal under the moon, and under especially the full moon, and this will really help to cleanse and reset the intention of your crystal. So, when we think about the moon as well and its frequencies, different phases of the moon will have different intentions as well. So, if there's something that you want to work with a particular phase of the moon and your crystal, then you put your crystal out under that moon phase. That could be for cutting ties, protection, grounding you and the crystal, or setting another intention with that crystal as well. So it's a really good way to keep a practice going with your crystals. If you want to use the sunlight, definitely use the sunlight, but I'd be very mindful of sunlight, because sunlight can really destroy amethyst. It can destroy the purple in the amethyst. So when we think about it, the crystals have been in the ground for a very long time, and sunlight, as I say, can really quell that colour. So just be mindful of some that you're going to be putting out there in strong sunlight, and only do it for from 11 till 2 o'clock. That's the most prominent time to be able to work with the sun in that way, and it's a good way to, again, set intentions or to cleanse the crystal. Now, when we think about sage as well, so sage is a really great way of cleansing the space around the crystal, and it's really good at ritual cleansing. And but obviously if you're going to use sage, please be mindful. I've put a picture in here of white sage to just remind people that white sage is very much an indigenous practice of North America and I think Canada, and they don't have access to it themselves because I think it's been over farmed, and it's also it's a closed practice as well for them, for indigenous populations from North America and Canada. So that's not to say that you can't use a smoke stick. You can create your own smoke using local sage. So if you look at one of the pictures there, with where there's all the bottles and the music, they are sage that I grew, and then I added lavender to them, and you can actually smoke and take away negative energy in that way. We just don't call it smudge, and we make sure, and we don't use white sage either, unless you are obviously a part of that cultural tradition, that indigenous tradition that will use white sage, which is then called smudging. But when we think about crystals anyway, just in general, they are a gift from Mother Earth, and they're also an expression. The crystals do have a unique energy signature that can communicate its purpose. So when we think about crystals as well, cleansing crystals and how to look after them, there's also an element of do what works for you. When I first started doing crystal work, I would be like, oh, what they put that under the moon for? And I felt like I had to do this and I had to do that, and I had to do it with sound, and I had to, and I was getting all a bit confused. Just do the one that works well for you. If that is just a quick sound with a sound bell, that's fine. If that is to use a smoke stick and smoke the space around, just do that one if you want to. I don't want to see this as, oh yeah, a rule book. This is not a rule book. These are just different options that you can try, and it's the same with the other slides as well. When you look, when you choose your crystals, it's not a rule book. It is just some hints and tips that you can engage with. Okay. Creating sacred space. Now, I'm assuming by this point that everybody is quite au fait in terms of creating sacred space. But I just wanted to highlight, especially with crystals, sacred space and crystal journeying is really vital when we're seeking inspiration and direction from your crystals. And, the space doesn't have to be overly complicated. It doesn't have to be taken over your room. It can be small. It can include candles. It can include other things, but just make sure that it's a really clear, defined space when you're working with your crystals. And I would not recommend having a sacred space in your bedroom if it can be avoided, because I think there's something very important to say about having sacred space when you're actively working within energies within our the druidic work, as well as working with crystals and maybe tarot and divination and all of those things. And I think taking that into the sleep space can sometimes give you, I mean, if you're very into this, having lucid dreams and lucid sleep, then obviously, knock yourselves out. But just be cautious. These ritualistic tools, especially if they're not put away properly, can keep you awake and certainly journeying more in the dreamscape. But also as well, I also think sometimes sleep, the sacredness of sleep, because I do believe that we, when we're in our sleep scape, we're doing lots of other spiritual work as well. So I think it's nice to have the two kind of separate, but I will clearly leave that up to yourselves. So intention setting. So we've spoken about this before. Intention setting, when we talk about Dr. Emoto, the impact of the intention is really important and it's really powerful. And having a crystal ally can help us amplify that intention. But the crystal has to want to work with you with that intention. And that's why it's really good to lean into your instincts about choosing what crystal you want to use when you are setting intentions. But the main thing with intention setting is about being concise and about being very clear. Decide what really matters and what it is that you're actually wanting to manifest. And explore areas of your life, explore things that you want to bring into the light into your life, and then use that as a foundation. Whereas if you've got a massive list of things that you want to manifest and you want to do, it becomes all very blended and all a bit like the universe is kind of what doesn't quite know which way you want to go. So again, be very specific, be very concise about what it is that you want to achieve, why you want to achieve it, and when you want to achieve it, and bring your intentions to life also by writing them down and making sure that you write them in the present tense as if they are happening now, and affirm only what you want and put feeling. And the intention really comes from the gut, and it has a frequency that you're going to be writing down and you're going to be speaking through your vocal cords, and the crystals will be able to amplify that to help in with the universe. Again, you can totally use lunar cycles to add an extra layer of vibration. So if you use the new moon, it's renewal, rebirth, and start a new project. So really have a good think about it, because when we do our other ritual work, especially in the druidic path, you have set ways of doing things, which is obviously correct, but it's precise and it's concise and it's clear. And really think about that as well when you're incorporating crystals, because it will amplify it. Okay. Grounding. So the origins of earthing go back thousands of years. The Earth's power and energy have been acknowledged throughout history. Initial records date back to the Chinese, who focused on Earth key. Native Americans have well documented respect for the mother and nature, which was an integral part of their culture. But there's a gentleman called Clint Ober, who is the person who's most known for this modern revival of earthing and grounding. And he was a retired and very successful pioneer in the cable industry. And when he had he had this eureka, I can't say it, eureka moment regarding earthing. So if you have a look at this picture here, this kind of visually represents what we talk about grounding, because modern life can make us ungrounded. In addition, when we're doing the work of balancing our energy systems, removing blockages, we tend to be at a higher vibrational realms, especially if we're doing ritual work, which can be quite trippy, and it can become, you can feel quite dizzy, overwhelmed. I've found like there's a sickness to it. You tend to feel a bit nauseous because it can be quite powerful. So the body, and these are signs that the body is really ungrounded. So if you do feel these dizzy, spaced out, unfocused headaches, feeling drained or totally wired, and you're not actioning your thoughts, try and think about this grounding. So some of the ways that you can ground is, the very first one, as most people will know, is about going outside, putting your feet on the ground, and that will, bare feet on the ground, and dance around a little bit. You can use black tourmaline, you can use lodestone, and you can use hematite. And I find when I'm using crystals in practice, I already have grounding crystals within the intention, as well as I'll have them around me as well. So, as I say, there's lots of a couple of other different ways that you can do grounding. So definitely explore, try and find out which one works best for you. And finally, before we move on to module 3, part 2, I just want to quickly talk about energetic protection and hygiene, because when we're working in these realms, crystals are really great to help us with this. So we become very much, if you look at this chart, sometimes if we're not really looking after ourselves energetically, and we're doing quite heavy work in the spiritual realms, we can cause, rips in the aura, cord attachments, energetic debris to be left within the energy body, sludge energy, stagnant energy, and even holes in the aura. And I find when we are really mindful about what it is that we're actually doing intentionally, very clear, making sure that we're protected, making sure that we're grounded, afterwards being clear and concise, it really does help to reduce the possibility of like not cutting ties. So the best, you can use something called selenite. It is one of the quickest way to cut all ties, to sweep and clear down the energetic body, and to remove some of these issues that are in this picture. The idea of cutting ties is really powerful. So say if you've been working with somebody, or working with some past work or ancestral work, cutting ties and ending the ceremony, ending the practice, and giving it back to the universe is a really powerful way to ensure that you are not tethered to that experience moving forward. Because what can happen is it can drain the energy from you, and also keep you vulnerable, because your energy is being directed to that situation, or that experience that you have engaged in, if you like. So clear cutting of the ties is really good energetic hygiene, and also using the light body exercise in order to put you in a protective space and a protective bubble as well. And again, selenite is another tool that you can use to sweep down, or use the yawen and use your energy to wipe down the body as well, with your hands or with the selenite, which is a really great way to do that. So you don't have to practice all those things that I've introduced to you. If this is a beginner's course, it's about just exploring what's available out there and finding out what you resonate with most. So I'm going to just go and do the next module. So I hope you enjoy this one, and I will see you in a little while.